Good afternoon. My name is Phathokuhle Zondi, and it's a great pleasure to welcome you to the CISA COVID-19 webinar series. Today, we're talking nutrition, immunity, and COVID-19. People who eat balanced diets tend to be healthier with stronger immune systems and lower risk of chronic illness and infectious diseases. In fact, existing evidence does highlight that diet plays a profound effect on people's immune system and disease susceptibility. But as countries are taking stronger measures to contain the spread of COVID-19, self-quarantine and the temporary closure of businesses may in fact affect normal food-related practices. The changes in dietary patterns during the corona outbreak could also be driven by fear and anxiety, and we know this from our own personal experiences, that the food choices we make can be affected by emotional state, and that stress can actually cause unhealthy eating and result in poor quality diet. So if you're struggling to maintain a healthy diet during quarantine or lockdown, you are not alone. We're hosting this webinar because many of you have put up your hands to say, we need guidance. How do we do better? I'm joined today by two very experienced and well-respected dietitians, Shelly, Meltzer, and Zeenat, Simjee. In the hour that we have together, I've asked them to do two things. The first is to remind us why it's important to be making good food choices in the era of COVID-19. And the second is to give us practical guidance on how to do this on a daily basis in a way that is sustainable. Shelly will tackle part one, and Zeenat will take on part two of the conversation. So by way of introduction, Shelly started the sports nutrition practice at the Sports Science Institute of South Africa in 1995. She has over 30 years of experience as a dietitian and specifically has experience in clinical, corporate, community, and sports nutrition. Zeenat Simjee holds a BSc Dietetics from the University of Stellenbosch and a postgrad diploma in sports nutrition from the International Olympic Committee. She has experience in government clinics, in corporate and in private practice, and is particularly passionate about sport. She is the first dietitian to be employed full-time by the Springboks, and she was a member of the 2019 World Cup winning squad. So she knows some secrets to success, and she's here to share some with us. I invite the audience to please join the conversation and to participate in today's discussion by way of questions that will make this meaningful and practically applicable in your own lives. If you're joining us from Zoom, there is a Q&A box at the bottom of your screens. And so please do type in your questions there and we'll address them all at the end. If you're joining us from Facebook, welcome. Please do type in your comments in the comment box and we'll get those questions and field them as well. We look forward to both of your insights, Shelly and Zeenat. And so without any further ado, Shelly, please may I hand over to you to take us through part one.
Thank you so much, Pato. And let me just see if this is going to work. So, right. Okay. So thank you, Pato, for that lovely introduction. And it was quite a lot of fun preparing this talk, which is going to be quite a challenge to do it in 20 minutes. But just as a starting point, the day before lockdown, I found myself in one of the biggest supermarkets in Cape Town and actually got stuck there, just having a look. I was quite intrigued at what people were shopping for. Not only were they shopping for food and of course, what might have been considered a popular item at the time, toilet paper. But I also saw them really getting caught up in the supplement department of the supermarket. So today, I really want to, in the time that I've got, look at the relationship between diet and immunity in COVID-19. We'll be looking how to navigate this practically from a food perspective, and I hope to give you some good take-home value tips. So just as a starting point, I think it's important to have a look at the many factors that are associated with the immune system, which is really a cell and tissue system involved in protection of our bodies. And although nutrition is the part that I've highlighted and the part that I'm going to be talking to now, I think we have to just also see and
We seem to have experienced some technical difficulties with Shelly. Shelly, can you unmute and just indicate if you're back online?
Okay, are we good?
Perfect. So you had just started with today's menu. Perhaps you can just go from.
Okay, so I'm not sure what happened. Are we back on track? Back on track.
We're back on track.
I'm going to go to the slide, right. So what I was saying here is that nutrition has a direct impact on the immune response through the provision of nutrients. So here I'm talking about energy and vitamins like vitamin B6, B12, certain trace minerals and minerals like iron and zinc. And if one is deficient in any of those, then you might actually end up depressing your immune function and increasing the susceptibility to infection. But there's also a relationship between nutrition and many of these other factors that are illustrated in this diagram. For example, nutrition will interact on stress and can interact on exercise and can interact with sleep. And a very important role that we're recognizing more and more is the relationship between diet and the gut. The gut playing such an important role in the immune system, and we are learning that the gut is the origin of most chronic conditions, and there's an interplay also between diet, the gut, and our genes. And that we're understanding now that the gut, what we call the microbiota, can actually shape the immune responses in the body. And that certain foods, like if you take broccoli, for example, or other cruciferous vegetables, they may actually impact and affect the immune system through activation of cells, what we call gene expression. So now what I want to get to is really how does this all interrelate to COVID-19? And if we think of COVID-19, there are two processes here that we call oxidation and inflammation that are involved in our immune response that under normal circumstances are well managed and well controlled. And they actually, these two processes, so the oxidative stress and inflammation, they help the body neutralize many stressors like pollution or response to exercise. But with COVID-19, these protective mechanisms, so we might have antioxidants that would actually help protect the body against oxidative stress, they become overwhelmed. And you have an overstimulation of the response, and the environment in our body subsequently becomes pro-inflammatory. And there's a cytokine storm, or what we call, it's an overreaction to the virus, and our cells therefore become severely damaged. And this affects many systems other than just the respiratory tract, which is why we may see the lining of the gut, the kidney, the liver, become affected in many COVID patients. And people who are at an increased risk for developing more severe symptoms include the elderly, although it doesn't mean that we're not seeing COVID, and as we know, in younger admissions to hospitals. And the reason that the elderly are specifically at risk is because antioxidant capacity decreases with age, which is one of the reasons why aging is a bigger risk. And then, of course, as I mentioned earlier, we've got the comorbidities like diabetes, cardiovascular disease, chronic respiratory conditions, and hypertension that also significantly increase the mortality risk. So just asking the question then, how can diet improve the immune system and offer resilience? I've brought it down to 5 different areas. Firstly, to address the pro-inflammatory conditions, because as I say, a lot of these chronic diseases of lifestyle are also underlying that as an inflammatory condition, by decreasing pro-inflammatory foods, by increasing anti-inflammatory foods, and by improving the body's antioxidant capacity. And also through diet, we can actually prime or strengthen the immune system. So I just want to point out this whole issue around comorbidities, because I think there's been a lot going around in the sense of, well, under stress and under lockdown, perhaps don't get too stressed out about your diet. And I think we have to maybe unpack that message quite carefully, considering the fact that in South Africa, we're sitting in a situation where if you look at the levels of obesity and overweight here, people with a BMI, body mass index greater than 25%, we're dealing with women, a 68% prevalence of obesity and overweight in women. And you can also see that in terms of pre-diabetics, hypertensives, and diabetics, the results are pretty alarming as well. And we do know that then with COVID, particularly if there's a cluster of these comorbidities, there's a poorer outcome if you've got a cluster of as I say, overweight, obesity, hypertension, diabetes. So surely then we should be looking at some strategies to address these problems. And when we look at strategies to address these, it's also, again, against a background, as Phathokuhle pointed out, that we are dealing often with a lot of fear and anxiety. We've got our access to food has become very changed in the lockdown process. Physical activities changed. And then, of course, we've got health and sleep. Mental health and sleep might also have been affected. And just the general enjoyment of eating might have become a much more stressful story. But a big thing, or a positive thing, is that with nutrition being a lifestyle, it's a lifestyle factor, a lifestyle risk. There are ways that we can actually, through making right choices and designing our nutrition strategies, we can actually deal with managing, if you just take overweight and obesity, just by focusing on what we call the energy density, the calorie content of our food, the quantity of what we eat and the quality of what we eat, we can make a big impact there. Let's just see why it's not moving on to the next slide. Okay, so strategies should address, if one just focuses on ultra-processed foods, I think we're sitting in a situation, even in lockdown, where I have seen that the access to these ultra-processed foods are actually quite easily available. That even we've got big sort of franchises that are offering easy, hygienic, clean foods, or the clean delivery of foods. But a lot of these foods, I think we've also got to recognize, are actually ultra-processed. So one's got to ask the question whether this is an appropriate strategy. And I think we really need a mind shift, an action to move from essential to optimal. The other area that I think we need to address is one seeing a lot of information around supplements. And I've just tried to draw in this slide a lot of the supplements that are currently getting a lot of exposure even in the scientific media. And I just say that in the scientific papers, there is an exponential increase in the number of publications that have become available. Just to give you an idea, now that we've got open access to journals, we're seeing papers that are being written and submitted. There's one here that was received by a journal on the 16th of April, revised on the 29th of April, accepted and published on the 30th of April. So we're seeing this huge plethora of information available and openly accessible to anybody. And the sorts of supplements that are being promoted are the ones that you would see on the slide. And in green are the ones where there's probably some evidence, but the problem is around the dosage and the amounts that are actually being promoted. And there are a whole lot of other questions, in fact, that one needs to ask around these supplements is, are they showing a direct impact on COVID-19, or is the evidence on which the recommendations being made related to other situations, perhaps pneumonia, perhaps upper respiratory tract infections? Who are the subjects that have actually been who's the population that the research was done on? Was it a heterogeneous population, as what has been recently shown with some vitamin D? There's been a lot of noise in the system in terms of just vitamin D supplements. But when you really interrogate that research, it's actually interesting to find out that, in fact, the studies have been done on heterogeneous populations. There have been lots of confounders. And I think sometimes one's also got to dig a little bit deeper and see who's been involved, and are there any companies that have, for example, been involved in the sponsorship of the research. So I'm just suggesting that one really needs to interrogate this a lot further. The other thing that I think we've got to point out is it's a principle that Ross Tucker in his presentation I think it was a few weeks ago, referred to, and that was the Goldilocks principle. And I'd like to refer to that in the sense around nutrition. And that is just to remember that in terms of our nutrient requirements, there is a specific requirement for every single macronutrient and micronutrient, and it is age specific and it is individual specific. And it's also going to be specific to a person's health conditions and whether they are actually undergoing any kind of, whether they are healthy or have any kind of, even if it's a chronic disease or lifestyle, or if they've got any infections, it is going to differ. And that there's a margin of safety, and this margin of safety is nutrient specific. Take too little of something, take too much of something, you're going to end up in the red zone. And just to illustrate that, I'm going to show zinc, because zinc is one of the micronutrients that has actually been shown to be a gatekeeper for immune function. It acts as a cofactor in so many different anti-inflammatory and antioxidant systems. And it also is involved with enzymes that are involved with altering gene expression. But if you overshoot the requirement for zinc, you can also end up with a problem. So on the one hand, a zinc deficiency is associated with an increased production of pro-inflammatory cytokines. The right amount, so just like Goldilocks would have had just the right amount, would result in balanced immune cell numbers and functions, and a balance between tolerance and defense mechanisms. But take too much, you end up actually suppressing your T and B cell function. So it's also was quite interesting for me to find a recently published in March 2020 position stand on nutrition, immunity, and COVID-19, particularly aimed at the elderly, where if you read, I've tried to underline it here. So the general advice is to eat a diverse and well-balanced diet rich in colored fruit and vegetables to increase the intake of our antioxidant and associated nutrients to support immune function. But you can see that the amounts of nutrients that are actually recommended in this paper are quite high. High for vitamin E, so anywhere between 134 to 800 milligrams per day. Zinc, you can see a wide range there. Vitamin C up to 2 grams per day. And vitamin D, they suggest up to 100 micrograms per day, because they say that these nutrients have been shown to enhance T cell and B cell immunity in human studies, including the elderly. They go on to say that there is no specific evidence that these nutritional measures can help protect against or even lessen the effects of COVID-19 infection, but saying that it does make pragmatic sense to support nutritionally both normal health and the immune system, with doses unlikely to be harmful before, during, and after COVID-19 infection. But in another website that I think I would almost suggest that you have a look at, it's a website called examine.com. They go on to warn that one should not, and certainly as far as zinc is concerned, exceed the upper limit for zinc, which is actually 40 milligrams. Zinc is 40 milligrams per day, that you should not actually exceed that for more than 2 weeks unless under the direction and supervision of a physician, because every nutrient, and I think we've got to remember that, there's a synergistic relationship. Take too much of one thing, it's going to impact on the absorption or effect of another micronutrient or nutrient. And with zinc, we're actually knowing that take too much, it can be toxic and could cause, for example, copper deficiency. So now, this really brings us back to the menu, the food menu. And I think now, not after COVID, but right now is the time to rethink your menu. This should involve planning, because without a plan, how can you actually make sure that you're getting the right nutrients in? And with a plan, in the context of COVID-19, this should involve fewer trips to the shop, and it therefore should involve ordering a bit extra. You can think about ordering a bit extra in terms of your milk and maybe freezing it if you need to, or frozen vegetables, whatever you, and other ones that can last for longer, your dried legumes and so on. Add strategies to your menu and to how you prepare food, and even how you grow food if possible. In terms of your shopping, Think about not ordering what I call those plastic foods, anything that kind of glows in the dark, or your pink sausages or foods like that. Anything that would have more than, if the ingredient list is long and you can't pronounce the names, then just think that might actually be a plastic, ultra-processed food. And then also consider how you're going to store your food to get the best nutritional value out of that. In terms of rethinking your menu, think about not taking in your pro-inflammatory foods. So here I'm thinking of fizzy drinks. You get lots of teaspoons of sugar per cup. Limiting your fast food, refined sugars and refined carbohydrates, highly processed meats, and heavily fried foods. In terms of the tick list, a phrase that I've coined from my husband, reach for the ground. Think about growing your own fruits and vegetables if possible. Think about the rainbow, getting all the colors that you possibly can on your plate. That way you will ensure a good range of what we call phytonutrients, fighting nutrients. Think about high quality protein foods, because protein also plays an important role in terms of your immune defense. Healthy fats, your omega-3s, your oily fish, whole grains, foods that are rich in probiotics, yogurts, kefir and fermented foods, even green tea. And I had to put on, because this is probably my little bit of a downfall, but good quality dark chocolate. Plus, in terms of your weight management, ensure an adequate overall energy intake. So again, Goldilocks principle, not too low and not too high. Food first, that's your best insurance, Fresh food that is varied. Adequate hydration, because hydration also plays an important role in terms of promoting salivary IgA involved in the immune defense systems. Avoid fad diets, scams, and haphazard, random use of supplements. Rest, recover, and breathe. Wash hands, don't touch your face, and remember food hygiene. From now and into the future, I am hoping that this will redefine the way, COVID-19 will redefine the way that we think about food. I'm hoping that there will be a lockdown on junk food. I'm hoping that there will be healthy food and access that becomes the easy choice for all. I'm hoping that some of the new positive learnings and skills, because I think people have also started preparing food from first principles at home, I'm hoping that those skills will carry forward. And I'm hoping that the solid foundations that are laid down right now, that these are really solid and that we don't just build on sand. I'd like to thank the colleagues that I have the pleasure of working with at Sports Science Institute in the dietary practice, Louise, Marie, Rowena, and Taylor. I'd also like to thank my daughter-in-law. We've had a lot of fun. As I say, I think we're all navigating the storm, maybe in different boats. My little boat at home is that I have the real joy of sharing our space with another dietitian, my daughter-in-law. So we get to spend some good times and good meals together. And I'd like to also thank all the Facebookers and Zoomers, and just wish you good health, stay safe, strong, and sane. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Shelly. With that as a baseline, then, I'm going to invite Zeenat to the platform to share your experience and your insights, and specifically giving us some practical tips on how to be put into action Shelly's advice. Over to you, Zeenat.
So welcome, and thank you for joining. Much of what Shelly has actually spoken about, I'm actually going to share the same or very similar information. In terms of today, we're going to talk a lot of practical guidelines and how you can go about ensuring that you are enhancing your immunity to prevent any viral infections. And again, these are practical guidelines that also the responsibility falls upon you in terms of implementing these guidelines. So I'm going to speak a little bit about briefly understanding some of the factors that influence immunity, very much like how Shelly has underpinned also the current evidence-based research to show you the implication of dietary intake on immunity. And then I'll be providing you some nutritional strategies to limit infectious risks, and then a sample 24-hour day to ensure that you kind of get an idea of how to implement the nutritional strategies we'll be talking about. So in terms of the question of immunity, very basically and very, simplified in terms of the factors that influence immunity, definitely sleep is one of them, stress management, and then different environmental factors also play a role. So like your, in terms of your circumstances, and then definitely, as Shelly has mentioned, dietary intake, so adequate nutrition plays a integral role in terms of immunity, and this can all play a role in decreasing your risk of infection. So in terms of the nutritional side, there is significant research that has showed and highlighted the importance of optimal nutritional status in terms of protecting against viral infection. Very recently, there's research that shows that malnutrition, and I'm speaking malnutrition not in the case of just undernutrition, but also obesity, and then what we call the hidden hunger. So a lot of individuals think that I have a good dietary intake, but they forget that micronutrients could be lacking, and we never really know when there's a deficiency until it's very severe. And this is what we call the hidden hunger. And all of this plays a risk or an increased risk in infection and on your nutrition. And that is why it's so important that we look into your dietary intake, because these factors assist with modulating the immunity. There's also research that shows that the Western diet, so this is your high saturated fat intake, it impacts your B and your T cells. So this is what depresses the immune system. And basically, this increases your risk for just any infection. And really, we want to kind of monitor that saturated fat intake because it does impair on your adaptive immunity. And as Shelly has mentioned, it does increase inflammation. This inflammation is going to impair on host defense systems, and also it's going to impact on your immunity. And that is why, as Shelly has mentioned, anti-inflammatory foods really play a role in supporting that immune modulation. So it has that boosting effect. And in terms of why I've inverted boosting your immune system, it's just that in terms of the immunity, if you have a good, solid, optimal dietary intake, there is very little need for you to add a supplement. And a supplement should only supplement in circumstances where you have a good dietary intake and you are still unable to meet requirements. And this is why the recommendations are to refrain from eating foods that are high in saturated fat. So very much like avoiding your takeaways, trying to avoid what Shelly has mentioned as plastic foods. So again, trying your best to also stay away from foods that are marketed inappropriately, so reading the labels and looking at your saturated fats, and also those that are higher in sugar, and also, having a look at rethinking your drinks, so also being careful of those hidden sugars. Then in terms of including high amounts of fiber, and fiber is great in terms of that gut health, supporting that gut microbiota because of the research that shows how your gut plays a role in your immune system, and as well as whole grains, which again are going to provide you with the fiber, but also a good source of carbohydrates, which is going to sustain your appetite as well. So you're not feeling very hungry a lot often, and you're not snacking unnecessarily. And then antioxidants. So antioxidants, again, they have an anti-inflammatory role. And this will, a little later in the presentation, I'll talk about examples of that. So the nutritional strategy is to limit the infectious risk is really, number one, we want to prevent the transmission of pathogens. And this is why it's so important that we maintain social distancing, we have our hygiene practices, and we have good food hygiene practices, because also we want to ensure that we are not having other infections, and we are avoiding food infections as well. So that's one of the main priorities in terms of your planning and also procuring food, and then also maintaining robust immune function. So we're going to talk a little bit about that. Weight management, as Shelly has mentioned, these comorbidities, which is your chronic diseases of lifestyle, that actually increase your risk of infections. And this is why it's so important to have those lifestyle practices that you really start making a habit from now onwards to assist you in maintaining weight. And really also maintaining your health through good nutrition habits is going to ensure that that immune function is at its optimal level. So in terms of So in terms of maintaining robust immune function, you really, protein plays a big role, and avoiding protein and micronutrient deficiencies is important. It's so important that you include lean protein varieties, because again, we want to reduce the total amount of saturated fat intake. And for vegetarians, that would include, varieties of your vegetarian options. Also avoid fad dieting. The reason being is you really want to focus on overall healthy habits. Like I mentioned, you want to maintain health through good nutrition habits. Avoid binge drinking of alcohol. Alcohol also plays a role in terms of the inabsorption or affecting absorption of certain nutrients. And really, we don't want you to have a great dietary intake, but then with binge drinking, it does impact on the absorption of certain nutrients. Also, gut health, again, that gut microbiota is so important. So items like consuming kombucha, which is actually a fermented tea, you've got kefir, we've got yogurt that actually has live cultures. These all assist in ensuring that we maintain a healthy gut microbiota. And at the same time, providing the body with fiber and the nutrients that you require through having 5 portions of fruit and veg a day. There is some research that shows in circumstances where melanin is quite low in an individual, a vitamin D supplement is important when your sunlight exposure is also quite limited during isolation. So I want to talk more specifically of, the striving for 5, or also, how we can incorporate that into your intake. So the nutrients that you will receive from your vegetables is so important for you to eat the colors of the rainbow, but also, like Shelly has mentioned, planning should be your best friend. So plan your week, and this will allow for you to have a shopping list that is quite easy to follow, and you're not going to have items that are unhealthy, or also items that are not necessarily needed. And also this will allow for you to understand if you are having a good variety of foods. Also applying portion control. So you'll see in the picture that is provided, it's a plate model. And in the plate model, it's a generalized guide or visual representation to ensure that people are maintaining portion control. So if your plate at main meals does not look like the visual representation over there, it's already one area to work on and to improve on. So we should always have half the plate, or about 1 to 2 cups in terms of your fruit and veg. And this is going to provide you with the nutrients to sustain your immunity and to actually support it. Then we've got your whole grain items. So choosing your whole grain meal items, also, like I said, it's going to sustain your appetite so that you are fuller for a little bit longer. You're not unnecessarily snacking. And then protein is really important. It's a building block for our cells. It also plays a massive role in terms of our immunity. And this is why 1/4 of your plate should be those lean proteins. So another thing is to kind of make sure that you stick to a routine. it's so important that you have specific meal times within a day, and that will allow for you to keep the discipline around the overall intake in a day. So we don't want you to have mindlessly eat a lot of nutrients or have a very large intake in an overall day, because we actually don't know what you are having. And again, you want to limit those high fat foods and the high sugar foods. So practice the 80-20 rule, which I usually say to a lot of my clients, and that is 80% of the time you want to strive for what we know is best for our bodies. But at the same time, we are human and we're going to want to indulge, and perhaps it's going to be a birthday in lockdown, or perhaps you want to enjoy a snack. And even so, if you're going to have a great antioxidant snack like dark chocolate, there is still a moderation that you would need to apply, and that is the 20%. So it's the responsible, I wouldn't say cheating, but the responsible indulgence. And the way that we can ensure that you're responsibly indulging is to have a look at labels. So again, to look at the total sugars and to look at the saturated fat. And something that also is really important, that is your fluid intake. So fluids play a role in the immune system. It plays a role in health. It also plays a role in terms of preventing headaches and dehydration and so forth. Even in athletes, there is a massive role in performance, and in the general individual, it plays a role in your well-being. So that's something that you should also ensure at your main meals, including a glass of water as your drink of option, instead of going for a fizzy drink or high concentrated juice that is perhaps rich in sugar. So just to have an idea of which nutrients are important for immunity, there are many, many nutrients that play a role, but really there are some that have shown benefits to assist in the immune system. And as I've mentioned on the slide, you'll see the aim is for a food-first approach, and you want to get the nutrients your body needs from food rather than a supplement to avoid the toxic amounts. So like Shelly has mentioned, certain nutrients have an upper limit, and we don't necessarily want to put our bodies at risk of this upper limit, and a food-first approach will give you a variety of nutrients in one food option. For example, have a look at your vitamin D that you could get. It helps in normal immune system modulation. You can get it from sunlight, like I've mentioned. You can get it from dairy products, your eggs, and then salmon. Salmon is something that has omega-3. That's also an anti-inflammatory food. It's something we want to increase the portions of. Another option to have a look at is, your essential fatty acids. Those are your anti-inflammatory foods, your avocado, so incorporating that in. It's your nuts, your seeds, having your olive oils, your canola oil. Really, when you go shopping, these are items you should prioritize on your shopping list. Like I've mentioned earlier, probiotics and gut health is really important. So we want to ensure that you have food options that stimulate the gut, items like your kombucha, like I've mentioned, your gherkins, yogurt also has live cultures. And then there are other nutrients that have played a role. Research has shown that it does assist in the immune system, and this is what we call nutraceuticals. But if your dietary intake is poor, the first route you should take is to first establish how you can optimize that through a food-first approach. And only when you are really struggling, there are certain supplements or nutraceuticals like your omega-3 supplements, so your oily fish supplements, and then your tart cranberry juices, because it provides anti-inflammatory properties, and then your broccoli sprouts, so again that helps with that gut. And in terms of your trace elements, is really to be careful of zinc. The usual recommendation is about 20 milligrams a day, and if you're including fish and the vegetables you see in the slide, you really don't need to have a zinc supplement. Other items that have shown benefits is magnesium and copper, and really you can get sufficient magnesium if you are incorporating 3 portions of dairy per day. going to move on to the next slide in terms of striving for 5. This is an infographic that we actually have on the Box Smart website. There are other infographics, and also we've got informational write-ups from Shelly and her team if you are looking for more information. But in terms of the infographic, the strive for 5 is really to strive for 5 portions of fruit and veg every day. This means you want to eat the colors of the rainbow, because different colors are actually different nutrients. So if you are an athlete and you are watching, there is, a recommendation that you could go up to even 6 to 8 portions per day. And really we want to increase, or you want to have 2 vitamin C rich fruits or veggies per day. And you want to include your B vitamin food. So this is your green leafy vegetables. And then in terms of blueberry or your berries, they provide those antioxidants. So just to mention again, vegetables provide the nutrients for cell repair, for antioxidants, for fiber, but we want to also make sure that to achieve the 5 a day, you could do it in various ways. It could be 150 mils of unsweetened 100% fruit juice, or in a smoothie. And this counts as 1 portion, or like I've mentioned earlier in that plate model, having 1 to 2 cups of veg at a main meal. It could also be having dried fruit, but really only 30 grams, because dried fruit can be high in your sodium, and also, we would rather that you have the fresh fruit option. And also it's really good to add your veggies into casseroles and into dishes. If you're making a spaghetti bolognese, for example, adding some carrots into there, there's many ways to add veg into your standard meal, so you could get in those 5 portions that you require, and also to include your snack or a veggie as a snack with a protein source. And this is again going to assist with maintaining or managing your appetite. And then really in closing, I've provided you with a little sample menu. It's really not specific. It's really basic. It's just to give you a guideline. And if you would like anything more specific, there are many dietitians that are doing virtual consults. I'm sure Shelly and her team are also providing this, and they could give you more individualized assistance. But it's really easy to, achieve that optimal nutrition status. If you are having your 3 main meals with snacks in between, when you are having breakfast, incorporate your whole grain again. As I've mentioned, that's going to give you fiber, so in the form of bran or oats. And then 1 to 2 eggs. That protein is really important. So much like the plate model, we want to ensure that you're always having a carb, a protein, and a veg at your main meals. And then also 3 to 1/4 cups of mixed fruit. So that could really be melon, anything that has various colors, because like I've said, we want to eat the colors of the rainbow. Then your mid-morning snack would be a veg. You could have it with hummus. Hummus actually provides a non-animal protein. It's actually from chickpeas. You could even have it from low-fat cottage cheese. And then you have a burrito too. It also depends, the amounts will depend on the individual. There are various factors that play a role in the total amounts, and this is just a guide. For lunch, for example, a tuna sandwich on whole wheat bread. Again, that whole grains is really important. And then your green leafy vegetables, and also the anti-inflammatory properties in avo. Then again, your mid-afternoon snack, fresh melon or mango slices with a handful of almonds. Almonds and walnuts also provide with a slight amount of protein, but it's going to give you some anti-inflammatory properties. And then your yogurt for that gut health. Then at dinner, a chicken casserole packed with seasonal veggies. That could be basically a day, or how you should plan your day. And obviously the options would depend on your preferences, but really we want to ensure that you instill proper dietary and lifestyle behaviors, because these are essential in the prevention and the treatment of respiratory viral diseases such as COVID-19. And research has shown that in a recent systematic review. Also, like I've mentioned, a food-first approach and striving for 5 a day should be a daily choice that you make as an individual. And lastly, maintain a healthy weight. So if we are implementing these basics, it's also easy for us to manage our weight. And again, a healthy weight also reduces your risk in terms of other chronic diseases of the lifestyle, which contribute to an increased risk of infections, as we've mentioned earlier. So thank you so much for listening in, and yeah, I look forward to the question and answer session.
So thank you very much to both Shelly and Zeenat for those very valuable insights. Very many questions coming in from our participants, which really speaks to the importance of this topic. So I'm going to fire right in, and maybe in order to ensure that we get through as many questions as possible, I'm going to ask you if you can keep your comments short, if you will, and focused to the question. So perhaps let me start with you, Zeenat, because there are about 3 questions on snacking. So I'll roll them into one question, but really the question is, should we be snacking in between meals? Because you've included some mid-morning and afternoon snacks. And then the other question is, I mean, how do you avoid snacking if you don't want to be snacking between meals? Those let me summarize with that. So snacking, should we be snacking between meals? If we should be avoiding it, how do we avoid it?
You know, Phatho, in terms of, most people do really well with the approach that I've showed you, 3 main meals with your snacks in between. And that's to actually monitor, to sustain your appetite so that you're not very hungry at a main meal. Again, snacking options need to be quite healthy or good options and quality options. So if you are including whole grains or your fibrous foods at your main meals, it should assist in ensuring your appetite is sustained so that you would only really require a snack maybe 2 to 3 hours after that. And again, like I've mentioned, it should be a wholesome snack and not necessarily, the quick, easy a packet of chips, for example, or snacking on your unhealthy options like the chocolate. You can still get the flavors that you would necessarily get, your salty, your sweet taste from either fruits or nuts or even biltong. So I'll give you examples of, if you are a person that follows 3 main meals with your snacks in between, it could be anything from 2 tablespoons of yogurt with a fruit, or like I've mentioned, having 30 grams of biltong, and then even leftover veggies from the night before. That is why planning is so important. If you don't plan, when you do snack, you'll often find whatever is just, around, and it's so important
Very
that
true.
you snack, you portion it out. So if you buy a bag of nuts, for example, nuts are great, but also there is an amount that you should be having. So anything good can become bad if you don't stick within your portion sizes. And again, if you're someone that really doesn't want to snack, then you do really well with your 3 main meals. If you follow the plate model and ensure those 3 main food items, so your veg, your protein, and your starch, if that is on your plate, you should have a balanced meal and you shouldn't feel the need to actually snack in between your meals.
Thank you, Zeenat. So that was tackled straight on. Shelly, I'm going to ask you to unmute your mic and address this question to you. So a specific question from Paul Candler asking, can you explain how the low-carb, high-fat diet strategy fits into the context of this talk?
Okay,
Shelly, I'm directing that question to you specifically.
Okay, thanks, Phatho. I would always say there are 3 words that are often used in answering a question, and that is, it all depends. Okay, because it all depends on one's interpretation, and that applies to even if it was a high-carb diet. What are the exact choices that one chooses to make to construct your diet? So I cannot, in a forum like this, unfortunately, answer that very, very open-ended question. It would all depend on the individual's approach and what their choices are. And I always say that for me, diet is complex. It's an art and it's a science. And we've got to actually understand all the confounders and all the other variables in a particular situation. And so just to put it in one word, I cannot answer that. It's going to depend on what foods are used to construct that person's diet. You would want to be able to tick not only the macronutrients, but the micronutrients as well. And I am going to just take liberty and add a little bit more onto this, because I think we must be careful of not falling into the trap of saying I'm eating a particular diet, and that's, I know the question wasn't phrased this way, but to say, can I rush out and buy a supplement to kind of make up any deficiencies? And for me, I think the analogy that I want to use there is one sometimes uses the add-on or the supplement in the same way as one wants to take a plaster and just kind of put a band-aid on something. And I think we've got to remember that food provides us with a whole lot more even than just nutrients, but we've got a matrix of nutrients within a particular food. So one has to really look at this very, very holistically to be able, and I hope I've answered the question sufficiently, but I would have to actually look at everything in a much more holistic manner to be able to provide a specific answer to that. And the answer could be by maybe the diet's okay, maybe there's strategies within the diet, or maybe there may be a supplement required, but I cannot make it as a generalized answer.
Thank you, Shelly. I'm going to direct the next question to you, Zeenat. Just a really direct question asking about the alternatives for kombucha for gut health, specifically for somebody who is halal.
So yes, because kombucha is fermented, there are some alcoholic product properties. In that circumstance, you know, you could have a bullwort vessel kefir, it's a type of dairy, and then you've also got your yogurt that, again, you could have. As I mentioned in one of the slides, you could incorporate a probiotic if you really do struggle with gut health. And that's going to help to regulate the gut. Your lactobacilli items, so, you know, your L-reuteri, for example, that really does assist in the gut health. So if you were to, for example, you know, struggle with yogurt, or like I mentioned, kefir or gherkins, you could also just get a probiotic like your L-reuteri, for example.
Thank you very much, Zeenat. There is a specific question here, and maybe this is still to use it while you're here. A question from our Facebook guest. How should we modify our diet when we're fasting from sunrise to sunset? And if there's not a quick answer to that, then I'll ask you to give me the short version and perhaps direct this particular participant to you outside of this format.
So it's really, you know, there's a lot to take into consideration, and like Shelly has mentioned, it all depends. So it does depend on, you know, the individual themselves, are there underlying conditions, what are their goals, because again, we want to look at, are we meeting your macronutrients as well as your micronutrients? But easy, simple ways to kind of get in or to densify those meals or the opportunities where you are eating. At sunrise, is to incorporate protein, to have essential fatty acids, so like your avo, your almonds, to densify your meal and provide a complex carbohydrate. So that would be like your wheat mix or your whole grain. You want to incorporate those nutrients that are really integral, and to have sufficient fluids. Once you break your fast, it's actually a great way to actually incorporate dates, because the date and the water, it helps to ensure that you're getting that hydration or better hydration. Also some added carbohydrates. Soups are actually a great way. So your halim and your other soups are actually fortified with lentils. So you're getting in protein, something that some people overlook and they go straight for savories instead. And again, that's your saturated fats. You really want to avoid that as much as possible. Again, you implement that 80-20 rule. You can have it when you do feel for it, but really focus your energies on the wholesome food items. If you have a small appetite, you can really have small meals throughout the evening until bedtime, and this will also ensure that you are meeting your carbohydrate intake, your protein intake, and the essential fatty acids. And then again, with your fluids, something that a lot of people don't prioritize enough. I usually recommend that you have 2 glasses of water, you know, at sunrise, at sunset, you know, you also have your 2 glasses of water then. But if you're having soup, you're hydrating then to every hour thereafter to try and have a glass and a half of water so that you are meeting that fluid intake that you would have missed out in the in our circumstance, 12-hour fasting period. So it's very, very brief, very generalized. And again, if there is any specific, you can again consult either a dietitian on ADSA or myself.
Perfect. That you came to the right place for that answer. That was short, but it was very comprehensive. Shelly, I'm directing this question at you. Another question from Facebook from a James Shepherd. How would you add whole grains to a diet other than in a curry?
Okay, I think I'm unmuted. Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Okay. Well,
yes, you are. I can hear you.
Okay, good. Breakfast may be a good starting point. First option in the day, and a wonderful option to actually start adding whole grains in, whether it be in overnight oats or a muesli or using ancient grains, what we call ancient grains. You know, you can make a muesli even, I think, of something like quinoa or with, with all different types of grains. That would be a very good, a good starting point. Even in your snacks, so things like rusks and, but, you know, made from first principles, where you actually leave out a lot of the highly refined sugars, because they're ways, and even you can make baked items, I think, of even just little oat crumpets or pancakes that you can make and then add fruit to that. So every meal certainly doesn't have to be a curry alone. So cereals and grains would be a good option to get that in. So think of the cereals as well. I'm done.
Thank you very much, Shelly. I'll open this one to anyone, but are there specific, and you both actually alluded to some, and I even took some notes there, Zeenat, but perhaps just to repeat it, are there specific vitamin supplements for over 50s that you recommend?
Okay.
So perhaps Zeenat, you gave a little bit of details on, or anyone, either of you could answer. Perhaps Zeenat, you can start, and Shelly, you can fill in some gaps if there are any, of course. All right, Zeenat, throwing the ball, giving the pass to you. Over to you, Shelly.
I was going to say that, again, it kind of all depends, even with the so it's to get an understanding of what a person's intake of what the limitations are in the diet, if any, before just making a blanket statement. I think on the one that Zeenat actually paid a lot of attention to was vitamin D, particularly the elderly, but it doesn't even just affect the elderly. I think now with lockdown, we even have people that are in professions where, by virtue of what they're working and the hours that they're working right now, may not be able to spend the time in the natural sunlight that they need. So vitamin D all around, I think, is something that we can kind of just put there, but at not those huge high values perhaps all the time. Okay, ideally you would want to actually understand what a person's blood results are before you just supplement, and specifically on your fat-soluble vitamins, which is A, D, E, and K, because they can be stored and become toxic. In terms of a multivit, if the question is, should I just take a multivit as an insurance policy? Multivits can also differ. And some of them might actually, for example, offer you more of the vitamins, but not enough of the minerals. If I think of an elderly person, perhaps even something like calcium may be a limiting mineral, and you're not going to get that in a multivit. So first choice is do the tick box on your diet, check all those, the sort of top 5. And if you're not sure, it may actually be worth your while before going and spending a lot of money. That could just be actually money down the drain. It may actually be worthwhile speaking to a person that is specifically works in this field and is a professional in this field. So there I'm going to say, you know, perhaps it may make sense to contact a registered dietitian. But yeah, okay.
I could just add on very much what I agree.
Thank you very much, Shelly and Zeenat. Okay. So I'm going to wrap it up here with 1 minute to go, because I am mindful of times. There are very many questions that are streaming in that we haven't been able to answer. Some of them are quite specific to certain clinical conditions. And so what we will do perhaps to address these questions is we will just answer them on Facebook randomly. So speak to ADHD or diverticulitis for those specific answers. But of course, if you'd like further details, we will make both Shelly and Zeenat's details available to you, and you can book in a consultation with them. So again, thank you once again to Shelly and Zeenat for sharing your experience with us this afternoon. Thank you to our participants for engaging and asking questions. Also, thank you for being patient, because I do realize that there were a few connection issues today, which resulted in a bit of an unstable network. If you are interested in learning more, CISA does offer an online nutrition course that Shelly herself designed, which helps you understand more of the nuances of nutrition and helps one make smart nutritional decisions. It's currently running at a 50% promotion. So if you've joined us again from Zoom, you'll get details of this course in the feedback survey that we send you. If you've joined us from Facebook, just give us an indication of your interest with your email address, and we'll make sure we send you those details. Heather Morgan is quoted as saying, "Every time you eat or drink, you're either feeding disease or fighting it." In the era of COVID-19, we want to make sure that we are fighting disease. Next week, we're exploring the impact of COVID-19 on sport and the wellness industry with two very special guests who I will confirm on Monday. And we're going to answer, what do we expect will happen in the fitness industry? What are we seeing globally in terms of trends? And how do we as industry and individuals who are passionate about wellness and health, how do we prepare ourselves for the changes that have happened and the changes to come? Shelly, Zeenat, again, I want to thank you for sharing your experience and your time with us. To the participants, thank you for joining us, and we hope to see you next week. Stay safe, take care, and goodbye.